welcome back to our podcast.
This episode, we had Cortney Merkel on, a former FBI agent. Donald, what did you enjoy about our discussion?
I loved her unique insight that she had in the issue since she spent so much time in law enforcement, especially federal law enforcement, and she mentioned that she oversaw some cyber situations which really related to what we were discussing, and I really enjoyed her knowledge in that. What about you? What did you enjoy?
I think our overall discussion, I think as listeners really get into our discussion, I think they'll notice a really different episode than what we usually do. I think this is a lot more serious than what we normally do because of her insight in how misinformation affects the world. And I really enjoyed that. I think that's something that really provided to me a good insight.
Yes, I agree. Well, I hope you all enjoy this episode, and I'm sure you will learn a lot. Thank you.
We were wondering if you could tell us a bit more about your educational background as well as your professional background.
Yeah, I have a bachelor's degree from Virginia Tech in sociology. I started out as an animal science major, and that didn't work out, so I switched majors. Graduated in 4 years. When I graduated, it was during a recession, very similar to what we're going through the last couple of years, and had a hard time finding a job, and was trying to decide whether I wanted to go ahead and get a master's in social work and be a social worker. Instead, because of the cost of school at the time and not having a job, because I went through on scholarships. The only reason I was able to go to college, that and working. So the local police department was hiring. I applied and was accepted into the ranks and went through the academy. I was with the police department for 10 years. During that period, I worked as a patrol officer, worked as a forensic detective and a sergeant, holding various positions within the department. I was a field training officer, an instructor, both general, driving, and defensive tactics. I also was in charge of vice and narcotics when I was a sergeant, as well as patrol. As a patrol officer, I worked as a crime scene tech and as a breathalyzer operator and a field training officer. So it was somebody who trains new police officers when they graduate from school. After about 10 years of that, I always wanted to be an FBI agent, so I went ahead and applied. I had an opportunity to apply. They had looked at the hiring freeze, and throughout the very long process, was lucky enough to be hired, and I went ahead and went through the academy at Quantico. And upon graduation from Quantico, they sent me to El Paso, Texas, and I worked there for about 6.5 years before transferring back to Virginia, where I'm from. And in El Paso, I investigated civil rights investigations, public corruption, did some fugitive work, worked on the evidence response team. And when I transferred to Richmond Division, I was actually promotion to chief security officer. So I was a chief security officer for 6 years. And I also supervised the applicant unit, was in charge of recruiting and in charge of the evidence response team. After I stepped down from that position, because in the Bureau, you serve as a supervisor for a certain number of years, and you have to either step down or go to Washington, D.C. as a supervisor, and I didn't want to do that. So I stepped down back onto a squad, and I worked gangs, criminal enterprise, high-tech crimes on the dark net. So we did undercover on the dark net, worked interstate transportation of stolen merchandise, worked with the local police departments on gangs and criminal activity. So that's about it in a nutshell. I retired from the Bureau in 2019 after a little over 20 years.
Excellent. That's an incredible background. My question is, throughout this very thorough professional and educational background that you have, were you taught about misinformation and its effects at all?
Yes, as a chief security officer, I was in charge of all aspects of security, and that included computer security, of course, and information security. I took a lot of classes on, spear phishing and phishing schemes and all sorts of internet scams and what to look out for. And through all that education, because when you're in law enforcement, you have continuing education. You can also take classes on things that interest you. So as a chief security officer, I took classes on various security issues. And part of that was, of course, the misinformation that's being fed to people through various means. It started out with people just getting, phone calls. So back when I first became a security officer, it was mostly people getting phone calls from overseas. Most of the time, very little of it was domestic. And they would do social engineering on people. They find old people and victimize them and get them to send them money. My grandmother actually was one who got victimized by somebody down in Florida. And she was called and told if she sent them $500 and they could roll that over and make it $5,000. Your typical scams. Unfortunately, the elderly usually are targeted in those type of scams. And then fast forward to 2016, 2017, we see more aggressive misinformation and disinformation campaigns. Misinformation is mostly just people, as you guys know, where there's no malicious intent. It's people looking at something. It appeals to them personally because they may have those same personal beliefs. And so they'll forward it on or share it with their friends on whatever social media site they're on. And then that kicks in the algorithms on that social media site and starts to the snowball effect. So it hits everybody's algorithms and everybody's feeds, whether it's TikTok or whether it's Facebook, Instagram, any of those where they all use the same sort of algorithm. Even YouTube does. It'll load up a video of what you might want to watch after you see something on there. And you may not even like what you saw, but it's going to load up that algorithm. We learned all about that through classes and through working investigations.
So you kind of mentioned your security positions, but
Yes.
in your security positions, I imagine you had this a lot, but how has misinformation affected you professionally, but also personally?
Professionally, you see a lot of people who become more extreme. Misinformation is used to hit people's emotional centers and to get them all stirred up. So professionally, you see that creating a division in people, whether it's far right extremists or far left extremists. Misinformation is put out there to really hit that emotional center. And you would have employees who are hyper aware of all this, but they still will fall for it. And a lot of times that would lead into the disinformation where somebody does have a malicious intent. And so as a security officer, it was part of my duties to do reinvestigations of employees, or if they're caught looking at something online that they shouldn't be, then I had to investigate that. So along those lines, I saw a lot of people, very well educated, savvy law enforcement people, whether they were law enforcement officers or our professional support, who aren't sworn, but they're still very much in the know of what misdirection is and how there are scams put out there and phishing schemes, and you think they would be able to recognize misinformation when they saw it. But yeah, everybody can fall for this. That's what makes it so dangerous. Now, personally, I gave you the example of my grandmother, but my nephew, who's 17 years old, he's looking at the internet, he's on the internet, he's on YouTube, he's watching these things. And so he brought up a couple of known conspiracy theories to me. One being, of course, the crisis actors that certain people have said took the place of people at the January 6th insurrection. And I said, these are not actors; those were real people who were there. You got to really look at things and do your research and think critically about what you are seeing and how you're being approached. And so he did that. He went and went to viable sources of information that were still on the internet, but he's not looking at YouTube and getting his news off TikTok. He's actually doing some real research from reputable institutions, whether they're educational institutions or political institutions or psychology, sociology. So it opened his eyes a little bit where he knows he needs to actually look beyond what's actually flashed in front of him when he's on the computer. So.
My next question is, since you have worked in law enforcement at the federal level, you have kind of this unique perspective of how people think. And I was wondering if you noticed a rise in misinformation or disinformation campaigns, whether it's like over the 20 years or recent years.
There's definitely been an increase in both misinformation and disinformation campaigns. And I think it's due to readily available technology, also due to the social networking. There's more and more social networking going on. And it's not just your Facebook or the first one I remember seeing was MySpace, years and years ago. And that has slowly evolved into what you see now and what you have available to you and, on your phone. My first cell phone was a bag phone that you kept in the car. And just to see this, you're walking around with a computer. So you're always inundated with ads. You're inundated with social media. You're inundated with news. And it may not be reputable news. It could be somebody who's just putting stuff out there and labeling it as news. So I definitely think there's an uptick. And if all these companies who control the social media don't open their eyes and try to get a handle on it now, I think it's going to get even worse in the future. So until we educate people on the dangers of misinformation and disinformation, it's just going to continue. And it starts at your level, your middle school, high school, college. They all need to become critical thinkers and question what they're seeing online and making sure they are getting it from reputable sources and not just reacting emotionally to what they see, because we all actively see what we want to see and we like to look at things that we agree with. That's just human nature. And that's what they're taking advantage of. That's what the misinformation campaigns are taking advantage of, and the disinformation campaigns are taking advantage of. They're hitting that dopamine in your brain. What's going to make you feel good? If it's making fun of somebody because of who they are or what they are or what ethnicity or any of the biases that people hold, then that's what's going to keep rolling. And that's what's going to cause all these extreme events to happen, like the January 6th attack against the Capitol. It also, you've seen an uptick, and I still kind of follow all this, even though I'm no longer employed to do so, but uptick in hate groups. We haven't seen this many hate groups actively recruiting since probably 20 years ago when I first started with the Bureau. So, hate groups aren't just your skinheads and your Ku Klux Klan. It's more insidious. somebody else behind that keyboard sending it out. And that includes your foreign actors, Russians, Iranians, any of the people that really don't like us as America. And once they want to stir discord and division, and they want to attack the democracy that way. So you see it on both ends, domestic and foreign actors.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly interesting. Also, from your unique federal perspective, has misinformation and disinformation and the rise of it impacted the public's view and opinion of the FBI or other government agencies?
Definitely. I think you see it every day. Just right now, the FBI has become kind of the pariah of the federal agencies just by virtue of what they do. So you have people complaining because the FBI conducted a search of a former president's home. And then you have them complaining they're searching a sitting president's home for the same reason. So you really can't win when you're doing your job. And we just, as law enforcement officers, don't just go out there and kick in people's doors and do it because of a certain political reason. The FBI is nonpartisan, as there's no politics involved. In fact, they're very stringent about the Hatch Act. The Hatch Act says that you can't openly in the workplace or on social media or in any sort of written documentation represent yourself as being one or the other, whether you're Republican or Democrat or independent. You have to be totally unbiased. And the FBI does not conduct investigations that solely because somebody is one political party or another. Director Wray is one of the finest men that I've ever met. I've known 4 different directors, starting with Mr. Free, and all of them are men of high ethics and high morals. And I'd like to think that the majority of the people I worked with were too. What you see in the news and what you see online and what you hear is people just attacking what is visible, what is the most visible to them, and who they can blame for certain things. And it happens to be the FBI. You also see it in, I think mostly in Department of Homeland Security gets it, because they have immigration and customs enforcement underneath their purview. I know that they deal with a lot of misinformation about the immigration crisis, about controlling our borders. And you have to either go down to the border and see how it is yourself. I lived on the border for a number of years. The immigration issue is probably worse now because there's a lot of people coming from Central America, Cuba, Honduras, some of the outlying areas. Before it was mostly Mexicans coming over just to work, but you get them, the misinformation campaigns start, calling people criminals, saying their MS-13 is invading the border, that they're here to rape and pillage. And no, I mean, reality, they're here to seek a better life and to not, do criminals come over? Sure, they do. People aren't totally innocent who are coming over the border, but it's not like how it was put out there on the internet and through news sources. So again, that's misinformation where there's a little bit of truth within it, but it plays towards people's biases and their emotions.
My next question is, and you already answered this a little bit in my previous question, but what would you say is the difference between foreign versus domestic disinformation campaigns, and what are some factors that are different compared to each?
I think when you're talking about foreign disinformation, they're the ones who really want to do us harm. I'll go back to 2016 during the presidential election. Russian actors actively put disinformation on all social networks. And they're able to do that because they have the people to do it. They use bots, and they just inundated us trying to sow division and create disruption of the American elections. We know that for a fact that Russia was heavily involved in that. Also, North Korea was a little bit involved here and there because they're allies, and also you see some from parts of Africa, other parts of communist countries in Europe that will attack, but mostly it's Russia, some China that really sent out the misdirection and the disinformation campaigns. And they do that just to incite anger with Americans, to divide people, affect elections. So I think you see more of that in the foreign realm. There are some domestic disinformation campaigns that you'll see. Most of them are trying to incite race wars. Again, the insurrection, not to keep harping on that, but that was part of disinformation as well as in misinformation campaigns going out there. Again, anything that creates malice or seeks to create harm, you'll see that both on domestic side as well as international side. I think you see more of it on the foreign side. I think you see more misinformation in domestic, and that would be more of the schemes that take place where they're stealing your money, or they're asking you to send them gift cards, the phone calls, the emails. Now it's through text messaging, so people just click on the wrong thing and they get sucked in through misinformation.
Do you see kind of misinformation becoming a bigger and bigger deal, or do you see like eventually it's going to reach its max and people will get a handle on it? Like, how do you see the trend of misinformation going?
I think misinformation is going to continue to get worse until there's a federal law passed. I know in Canada and I believe Britain, UK, have both passed federal laws that are directed towards social media for them to use different algorithms. The algorithms they use now, like I said before, they feed on what you're looking at. And so if you're looking at something on social media that appeals to you, so let's say I'm a white supremacist, so I'm looking at skinhead video on YouTube, and it's going to load up behind that. We think you're going to like these videos, and it continues to do that. And the danger of that is that kids in middle school and probably even elementary school at this point start out just on YouTube looking at cartoons, and then they'll start getting curious because human beings are curious. That's natural, and they're going to start just Googling stuff or looking at stuff on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok. And the people who do the misinformation campaigns know this, and they're going to put that stuff out there, and they're going to put it in a way that's appealing, whether it's some sort of anime that might appeal to kids, or a cartoon of some sort. I know anime is a cartoon, but any other type of cartoon. Through the TikTok videos where they're singing, dancing, all that can be used to put out misinformation. And I think that's where the danger is. Until they are tasked to change their algorithms to capture more of this misinformation and disinformation, then I think it's just going to continue to snowball, unfortunately.
My next question, you've also kind of touched on this whenever we asked about if you've been affected by it professionally or personally, but is there a specific instance of disinformation that you saw that stuck out as extremely alarming? whether it is throughout your career or personal life?
Probably the most alarming would fall under the 2016 presidential campaign, just because I was still with the Bureau. I was working high-tech crimes. And I saw it not only on the open internet, what we use every day, but on the dark net was even worse. That's where all the criminal activity happens. That's where all the cryptocurrency came from. Because that's how you buy and sell anything on the dark net. And as simple as downloading a router, you just download an onion router and you can get onto this criminal portion of the internet. So you would see during the course of my official duties, I would see that on the dark net, the stuff that was being shoved out there by bots and by human beings behind a keyboard. We also would look at regular social media when we were investigating gangs, and it was just amazing to me how much of that disinformation you saw out there that people would like and agree with and share, and it just incited more anger and division, and it really is an attack on democracy. I'm not trying to be dramatic. There's nothing dramatic about there. It's something everybody should be really worried about, that they're being manipulated by these foreign actors who are putting that information out there. And you really need to be skeptical of everything that you see and hear and read. You have to do your research. You have to go back and really question what you're seeing. It might look real, sound real, it appeals to you, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's real. So.
And kind of as we close this out, is there any skills in detecting misinformation that you think children and high school students and middle school students should learn? And how do you think we should go about teaching them, whether it be like in schools or independent programs?
I think education starts in the home, but if your parents aren't telling you, hey, this isn't real, and having a conversation with you about critical thinking and how to look at things with both eyes wide open and have some healthy skepticism about what you're seeing, you're just going to fall down that rabbit hole. I think that the schools, as we become more and more invested in what's on the computer and what's on the internet and what's being put out there, we need to really teach our kids to be critical thinkers. I think that is a lost art. I don't think you see it being taught anymore. And by critical thinking, I mean you need to teach kids to question things, to have a healthy curiosity. Don't take things at face value. Ask questions. Have a conversation. If you don't have a parent at home to have a conversation with, have a conversation with your teacher or a mentor, a coach. You really need to get the kids out of the video games and trusting everybody, that everybody has good intentions, and not scare them per se, but to tell them, hey, not everybody who's on the internet is a nice person. And not everybody who's putting this information out is a good person. You really need to think about it. Don't just react. You have to draw back on the reaction and pause. Hit that pause button, think about it a few minutes, and then look at it again before you share something or before you comment on something. For one, the internet's forever. Whatever you put out there is going to be there forever. And I think a lot of people, young people especially don't think that way. And, when I was growing up, you didn't have to worry about that. People didn't have a camera they were carrying around everywhere where they could audio tape you and video record you. So I think that's the best thing we could do. And maybe that would fall under something that you could take in school, or a class that could be developed in high school. Like I used to take home ec, they don't have home ec anymore, but they need something that is daily skills, whether it's safe computer use, making people aware of misinformation and disinformation, aware that there are people out there who want to harm you, the sexploitation, which comes to mind, where kids are being blackmailed because they've sent a picture they shouldn't have to somebody who asked them for it because they think that person is somebody else. So the catfishing, it's all very real problems. And they all fall under misinformation. Some of them fall under disinformation because there's a malicious intent there. So we really do need to educate. And whether it's a class in school or a class off campus somewhere that they could go to at the YMCA or the YWCA, or at a community center, or even just Big Brothers, Big Sisters, or some sort of mentorship program. I personally think that the schools have a duty to really take care of that, whether it's a class or just during, I guess you still have wherever all those kids come together in the auditorium and they have meetings, big meetings. But the big thing is to be skeptical about what you're seeing, hearing, and reading. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with being skeptical. Just don't let it totally make you paranoid so that you think that everything is bad and everything's wrong. Everything in moderation. So that's the way I look at it.
Thank you so much for talking to us. We really, really appreciate it. I think we're about out on time. But thank you so much. We loved your insight and your answers.
Right,
Thank you
wonderful.
very much.
Well, you're very welcome anytime. Okay. Y'all have a good night.
You too. Have
You
a good
too.
one.
Thank you.
Bye.